He didn't bark when he saw me again. He just looked at me like I was the only thing that had ever mattered. The first time I noticed him, the air felt wrong, like something had shifted just out of sight, and even before I turned around, I could feel it, that quiet pull in my chest I hadn't felt in years, not since before everything went dark, before I learned how to walk through life without really being in it, before I stopped expecting anything to come back once it was gone. And yet there he was, standing across the park like he had been waiting, not moving, not making a sound, just watching me. With eyes that didn't belong to a stranger, eyes that carried something steady, something certain, something I didn't recognize anymore in myself, and I almost kept walking, almost ignored it like I had learned to ignore everything else that tried to break through the numbness. But my feet slowed anyway, like my body remembered something my mind refused to touch, and the closer I got, the tighter my chest felt, like something was pressing from the inside out, asking to be let back in, asking to be felt again. And he didn't move until I was just a few feet away, didn't flinch, didn't hesitate, just lowered his head slightly and took one careful step forward, like he was afraid I might disappear if he moved too fast. And that small movement hit harder than anything else because it wasn't fear, it wasn't uncertainty, it was recognition, the kind that doesn't ask permission, the kind that doesn't need confirmation. And I swallowed hard, trying to push it down, trying to remind myself that I didn't know this dog, that whatever this was, it wasn't mine. Not anymore. Not after 5 years of silence and distance and choices I couldn't take back. But then he got closer, close enough that I could see the faint scar along his front leg, barely visible under his fur. And something inside me cracked just enough to let the memory slip through. Rain hitting my jacket like needles, my hands shaking as I worked through twisted metal and broken debris. His body barely moving, his breathing shallow, and my voice hoarse, desperate, telling him to stay with me, telling him he wasn't alone, telling him I wasn't leaving him there. And for a second I couldn't breathe because the past wasn't past anymore. It was right here, standing in front of me, alive, waiting. And he let out the softest sound, almost a whisper, and leaned forward just enough that his head brushed against my hand. And I didn't pull away, couldn't, because something deeper than thought took over, something that remembered what it meant to care, what it meant to hold on, what it meant to not walk away. And as my fingers curled into his fur, warm and real and solid beneath my touch, I realized I hadn't just found a dog in a park. I had found a piece of myself I thought I had lost somewhere along the way, and I wasn't ready to face what that meant. His fur was warmer than I expected, softer too, like he had carried years of waiting in silence and somehow kept that part of himself untouched. And I felt my hand linger longer than it should have, fingers pressing slightly as if I needed proof that he was real and not just something my mind had pulled out of the past to remind me of who I used to be. And he leaned into it without hesitation, like he trusted me completely, like 5 years had not changed anything for him. And that was the part that unsettled me the most, because everything had changed for me, everything. I was not the same man who had knelt in the rain and promised a wounded animal that he would not leave him behind. I was not the man who believed that saving something meant you could still be saved too. And yet here he was acting like that man still existed, like he had never left. And I swallowed hard, my throat tight as memories kept pushing forward, uninvited, relentless, the weight of a soaked jacket clinging to my shoulders, the sound of distant thunder, my boots sinking into mud as I carried him step after step, counting each one like it mattered. Like if I stopped even for a second he would slip away. And I remember talking to him the whole time, not because I thought he understood but because I needed him to stay, needed something to hold on to in a place where everything else felt like it was slipping. And now his breathing was steady against my wrist, calm, grounded, like none of that fear had ever touched him, like he had decided a long time ago that I was safe. And I did not know what to do with that kind of certainty anymore. I had spent too many nights trying to forget, too many mornings waking up with the same hollow feeling that nothing really stayed, that everything eventually faded or broke or walked away, and I had learned to accept that, to live with it, to keep my distance so it would not hurt when it happened again. But he did not keep his distance. He stepped closer, pressing his head against my chest now, slow, careful, like he remembered exactly where he belonged, and my breath caught because that simple movement hit harder than anything else. It was not just recognition, it was trust. It was loyalty that had survived time and separation and whatever life had thrown at him, and I found myself lowering to one knee without thinking, my other hand coming up to steady him as if he needed it when really it was me who needed something to hold on to. And for the first time in years, the noise in my head quieted just enough for me to hear something else, something steady, something alive, his heartbeat, strong and unwavering, and I closed my eyes for a second longer than I meant to, letting it ground me, letting it remind me that not everything had been lost, not everything had slipped through my fingers. But then a thought crept in, sharp and immediate, cutting through that fragile moment, because if he remembered me after all this time, if he had found his way back somehow, then there was only one question that mattered: where had he been all these years, and why did it feel like I was the one who had abandoned him? The question would not leave me alone. It sat there in the back of my mind like a weight I could not shift, pressing harder the longer I stayed there with him, because the truth was I did not deserve the way he looked at me. I did not deserve the certainty in his eyes, and the longer I let myself feel it, the more something twisted deep in my chest, something close to guilt, something I had gotten very good at ignoring, but not today, not with him standing this close, breathing steady like nothing had ever broken between us, and I pulled back just slightly, enough to look at him fully, really look this time. His coat a little rougher than I remembered, a few faint marks that told a story I was not there to see. His ears twitching at the distant sound of traffic, but his eyes never leaving mine, locked in place like I was the only thing in the world that mattered, and I shook my head under my breath, almost like I could clear the feeling away, almost like I could step out of this moment and go back to being the version of myself that did not feel anything at all. But it did not work, because he followed me one step forward, then another, closing the distance again without hesitation, like space itself was not something he accepted between us, and that was when it hit harder than before. Not the memory of finding him, not the night in the rain, but the morning after, the quiet, the stillness, the way he had rested his head against my boot like he had already decided I was his person. And I remember sitting there, exhausted, watching the sun come up over a place that never really felt like morning, thinking maybe something good could still exist even in the middle of everything else, and I had held on to that thought longer than I should have, longer than made sense, and maybe that was why leaving him had felt like tearing something out of myself at the time, even if I had buried that feeling fast, even if I told myself it was necessary, that I did not have a choice, that someone else would take care of him better than I ever could. And now standing here, looking at him, I was not so sure anymore, because if that had been true, if he had been safe and cared for and surrounded by something better, then why was he here now? Why did he look like he had been searching instead of settling? And I felt my jaw tighten as that thought settled in, heavier than anything else, because it meant the story I told myself all these years might not have been true at all. And before I could stop myself, I let the words slip out, quiet, rough, almost unfamiliar in my own voice. "Where did you go?" And he tilted his head slightly, like he heard something deeper than the words, like he understood the question I was really asking, and then he stepped closer again, pressing into me with that same steady trust, answering in the only way he could, and it was not where he had been that mattered, it was that he had come back, and somehow that made everything I had tried to forget come rushing back with him. It should have been simple to stand up and walk away, to leave this moment where it was before it reached any deeper, but my body would not move, and he did not give me the chance to pretend this meant nothing, because he stayed right there, close enough that I could feel his breath through the fabric of my jacket, steady and patient, like he had already decided how this would go, like he had already decided that I was not leaving again. And that thought sent something sharp through me, because I had spent 5 years building distance, 5 years making sure nothing could reach me like this. Nothing could pull me back into a version of myself I did not trust anymore. And yet here I was, stuck between who I had been and who I had become, and neither one felt solid under my feet, and I exhaled slowly, trying to steady myself, but my hands stayed on him, fingers resting against his neck, feeling the warmth, the life, the quiet certainty that he carried without effort. And I realized something I had not let myself think about before. He had not just recognized me, he had chosen me again, without hesitation, without doubt, and that kind of choice did not come from a moment, it came from something deeper, something built over time, something that had survived distance and change and everything in between, and I did not know how to respond to that, because I had not chosen anything in years, I had just moved forward, step by step, day by day, without looking back, without holding on, and now everything I had pushed away was standing right in front of me, breathing, waiting, and I felt my chest tighten again. But this time it was different, not panic, not the familiar edge of something breaking loose, but something heavier, something that asked more from me than I was used to giving, and I shifted slightly, lowering myself the rest of the way to the ground so I was eye level with him, and he did not hesitate. He stepped closer immediately, closing that last inch of space like it had never existed, and I let out a quiet breath I did not realize I was holding, because part of me had expected him to stop, to second guess, to treat me like the stranger I had become, But he did not, and that broke something open in a way I could not control, because if he could still see me like this, if he could still believe in something I had stopped believing in, then maybe I had been wrong about more than just him, and that thought was harder to face than anything else, because it meant I had not just left him behind, I had left something in myself behind too, something that had not disappeared the way I told myself it had, something that had just been waiting, quiet, buried, but still there. And as I sat there with him pressed close, the noise of the park fading into the background, I felt that buried part of me shift for the first time in years, small, fragile, but real, and I knew without saying it out loud that this was not just a coincidence. This was not just a random moment in a park. This was something that was asking me to choose, to step back into something I had walked away from, and I did not know if I was ready for that, but the way he stayed with me, the way he refused to let that distance return, told me one thing I could not ignore. I might not have come back for him, but somehow he had come back for me. The thought stayed with me even as the moment settled into something quieter, heavier, like the air had shifted and everything around us had slowed down just enough for me to feel it fully. And I realized I had not moved for minutes, maybe longer. Just kneeling there with him pressed against me like this was the most natural place in the world, like time had not stretched 5 years between us, and I let out a breath that felt different, less guarded, less controlled, and it unsettled me in a way I could not ignore, because I had built my life on control, on distance, on keeping everything contained so nothing could reach in and pull me apart again. But he had already done that without trying, just by showing up, just by remembering, and I looked down at him again, really looked this time, not through the haze of memory or shock, but as he was. Now, present, real, his body steady, his posture relaxed in a way that told me he felt safe, completely safe, and that realization hit harder than anything else because it meant he did not see the distance. He did not see the years or the changes or the man I had become. He only saw me the same way he had back then, and I did not know if I could live up to that version anymore. Did not know if I deserved that kind of trust after everything I had chosen to leave behind, and my hand shifted, slightly brushing along his side as if tracing the outline of something I needed to understand, and that was when I felt it. A small piece of fabric near his collar, worn but still intact, and my fingers paused there, hesitating for just a second before I pulled it gently into view, and my breath caught before I could stop it, because I knew that tag, I knew the shape, the faded edges, the way the metal ring had worn down over time, and I turned it slightly, just enough to see the engraving. That had not changed even after all these years, and there it was, clear, undeniable, my own handwriting stamped into metal, his name, Max, and beneath it a number I had not dialed in years, a number I had tried to forget, and something inside me shifted all over again, deeper this time, because this was not just recognition anymore. This was proof. Proof that he had carried a piece of me with him through everything, proof that no matter where he had been or what had happened, he had never let go of that connection, and I felt my throat tighten as the weight of that settled in, because I had let go. I had walked away, I had told myself it was the right thing to do, that he would be better off, that I could not give him what he needed, but he had not made that same choice. He had held on, and now he was here, standing in front of me like none of that distance mattered, like I still belonged in his world, and I closed my hand gently around the tag, holding it there like it might disappear if I let go, and for the first time since he appeared, a different kind of thought pushed through. Everything else, not fear, not confusion, but something quieter, more certain, because if he had carried my name with him all this time, if he had found his way back somehow, then maybe this was not just a moment, maybe this was something I was meant to face, something I could not walk away from again, and the question was no longer where he had been, but whether I was ready to stay this time. My fingers stayed wrapped around that worn tag longer than they should have, like letting go would somehow erase the proof that this was real, that he had carried my name with him through years I could not account for, years I had chosen not to look back on, and I felt something settle in my chest, not heavy this time, not crushing, but steady, like a weight finding its place instead of pressing down, and I exhaled slowly, my thumb brushing over the engraved letters again. Max, the name I had given him on a night when I did not think I would see morning, the name that had meant something simple back then, something grounding, and now it felt like something else entirely, something that had survived both of us changing in ways we could not undo, and I looked up, meeting his eyes again, searching for something I could not quite define, maybe a sign that I was wrong, maybe a reason to step back and tell myself this was coincidence, that this connection was not as real as it felt, but there was nothing uncertain in the way he looked at me, no hesitation, no question, just that same quiet certainty that had been there from the beginning, and it disarmed me in a way I was not prepared for, because I had spent years learning how to question everything, how to second-guess every feeling, every memory, every moment that tried to pull me back into something deeper than survival, and he was undoing that without even trying, just by being here, just by remembering, and I shifted slightly, my legs stiff from kneeling, but I did not stand yet, not fully, because something told me that if I broke this moment too quickly it might disappear, like so many other things had, and he stayed close as I moved, adjusting with me, matching the distance without being asked, like he was tuned to me in a way I had forgotten was possible, and I let out a quiet breath that almost sounded like a laugh but stopped before it could become one, because it felt unfamiliar, like something I had not allowed myself in a long time, and I shook my head lightly, more to myself than to him, because this was not how my days usually went. This was not the version of life I had settled into, quiet, controlled, predictable, and yet here I was, holding onto a piece of my past that refused to stay buried, and the question that had been building finally pushed through clearly. Not just where had he been, but who had he been with, who had taken care of him, who had kept him going all this time, because it mattered, more than I wanted to admit, and I glanced around the park instinctively, noticing people moving in the distance, conversations blending into background noise, a normal afternoon continuing. Like nothing had changed, and for a second it felt strange that the world could keep moving when something this big had just happened. Something that shifted everything inside me without anyone else even noticing. And I looked back down at him, my hand resting more firmly now, less hesitant, less unsure, and the thought settled in clearer than before. I could walk away again. I could tell myself that someone else would come looking for him, that he belonged somewhere else, that this was not my responsibility anymore. But the way he stood there, steady and unwavering, made that thought feel hollow before it could even take shape. And I knew then that this moment was not just about recognition. It was about choice, the same choice I had made once before, only this time there was no rain, no chaos, no urgency forcing my hand, just me, standing here with the chance to decide what I was going to do next. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the weight of that choice fully, because this time, walking away would not be something I could pretend was necessary. It would be something I chose. The choice did not feel dramatic. There was no sudden clarity or loud moment that told me exactly what to do. It was quieter than that, almost unsettling in how simple it felt, because as I looked down at him, really looked this time without trying to push anything away, I realized I had already made it. Not in words, not in some clear decision I could point to, but in the way my hands stayed on him, in the way I had not stepped back, had not created distance the second I felt something real. Again, and that realization settled deeper than anything else, because it meant I was not as detached as I had convinced myself I was. It meant there was still something in me that responded, that stayed, that chose connection even when it was easier to walk away, and I let out a slow breath, my shoulders loosening just slightly as that truth took shape, and he shifted closer again, pressing into me with that same steady presence, like he felt the change before I even fully understood it myself. And I almost smiled at that, the smallest hint of something I had not felt in years, because it was not forced, it was not something I was trying to hold on to. It just happened, quiet and unexpected, and that alone felt like something worth noticing, and I finally pushed myself up to stand, my legs protesting for a second before steadying, and he adjusted immediately, stepping back just enough to stay aligned with me, his eyes never leaving mine, waiting, not anxious, not uncertain, just waiting, like he trusted whatever came next, and that trust carried weight, more than I was used to holding, but it did not feel like pressure. It felt like something I had been missing without realizing it, and I glanced around again, more aware now of where we were, the park stretching out around us, people passing by without a second look, cars moving steadily along the street beyond, everything normal, everything unchanged, and yet none of it felt the same anymore, not with him standing here, not with the past and present colliding in a way I could not ignore, and my hand dropped briefly to my side before lifting again, almost automatically, resting against his shoulder like it belonged there, like it had always belonged there, and I shook my head slightly, more grounded. Now, more present than I had been in a long time, and the next thought came clearer, sharper, not something I could avoid anymore, because if I was not walking away, if I was choosing to stay, then I needed to understand what that meant, where he came from, where he was supposed to go, and whether there was somewhere he already belonged that I was about to step into, and that question pulled my attention outward again, scanning the edges of the park more carefully this time, looking for something I might have missed before, someone calling out, someone searching, any sign that he was not alone before he found me. And as I stood there, more aware now, more open than I had been in years, I realized something else that shifted the ground under my feet all over again. Because if no one came, if no voice called his name, if no one claimed him, then this was not just a reunion, it was a return, and I was not the only one being given a second chance. He was too, and what I did next was going to decide what that chance became. No one called out to him, not from across the park, not from the sidewalk, not even a distant voice that might have carried his name through the noise, and the longer I stood there listening, the more certain it became that there was no one coming, no one searching, no one expecting him to return, and that realization settled quietly but firmly, like a door closing behind me, and I felt something shift again, deeper this time, because it meant this moment was not temporary, it was not something that would resolve itself if I just waited long enough. It was something that was already mine to decide, and I glanced down at him, half expecting to see some sign of uncertainty now that nothing else was pulling him away. But there was none, just that same calm presence, that same steady focus that had followed me from the second he stepped into my path, and I let out a breath I did not realize I was holding, because part of me had been waiting for an out, waiting for something to step in and make the choice easier, but there was nothing, just me and him standing in the middle of a normal afternoon that no longer felt normal at all, and I shifted my weight slightly, testing the moment, testing myself, and when I took a small step forward, he moved with me instantly, not rushing, not pulling ahead, just matching my pace like he had always done it, like he knew exactly where he was supposed to be without needing direction. And that simple movement said more than anything else could have, because it was not about being found anymore, it was about staying, and I stopped again after a few steps, turning slightly to look at him, really look this time without the hesitation that had been there before, and I nodded once, more to myself than to him, because something had settled into place in a way I could not ignore anymore, and my hand reached down, resting more firmly along his side, not testing, not questioning, just there, steady, and for the first time since he appeared, I spoke again, my voice quieter but clearer, more certain than it had been before. "You are not going anywhere," and the words felt different as soon as they left my mouth, not like a promise made under pressure, not like something I said because I had to, but something I meant because I chose to, and he responded in the only way he knew how, leaning into me again, that same quiet trust, that same unwavering presence, and I felt something inside me settle in response, not fixed, not fully healed, but no longer as empty as it had been before, and I looked out across the park one more time, taking in the movement, the sound, the life, continuing around us, and it felt distant now, like it belonged to a different version of me, one that had been standing alone just minutes ago, and I realized how quickly everything had shifted, how one moment had pulled me out of years of distance and brought me back to something real, something grounded, something that required more than just getting through the day, and as I took another step forward, this time without hesitation, feeling him move with me again, steady and certain, I understood something I had not been ready to admit until now. This was not just about finding him again, it was about what came next, about whether I could hold on to this and not let it slip away like everything else, and as that thought settled in, I felt the weight of it clearly, because choosing to stay was only the beginning, and I had no idea yet what it was going to take to make sure I did not lose him again. The next step felt heavier than the first, not because I did not know what to do, but because I understood now that this was not just a moment I could walk away from later. It was something that would follow me past this park, past this afternoon, into whatever came next, and I could feel that weight settling in as I walked, slow at first, testing the rhythm, listening to the sound of his steps beside mine, steady, matched, like he had never learned any other way to move except in sync with me. And that realization stayed with me longer than I expected, because it meant he had not adapted away from what we had. He had carried it forward unchanged, while I had spent years trying to reshape myself into someone who did not need it, and I exhaled slowly, my hand brushing lightly along his back as we moved, grounding myself in something real instead of drifting into thoughts I could not control, and for a few seconds, everything felt almost simple, just a man and a dog walking through a park, nothing complicated, nothing heavy, just movement and breath and presence. But that simplicity did not last, because the questions came back, sharper now, more specific, not just where had he been, but how had he gotten here, how had he found me in a place I had not even planned to be today, and the odds of it all did not make sense, not in a way I could easily dismiss, and I slowed again, stopping near the edge of the walkway, my eyes scanning the area more carefully this time, not just for a person calling his name, but for anything that might explain how this had happened, and that was when I noticed it, a small detail I had missed before, something just beyond the tree line near the far side of the park, a simple sign attached to a post, partially hidden by shadows and distance, but clear enough once I focused on it, and my chest tightened slightly as the words came into view. Animal shelter, adoption. Event today, and everything shifted again in an instant because that changed things, not in a way that erased what had just happened, but in a way that added something new, something I could not ignore, and I looked down at him again, at Max, at the worn tag still resting against his collar, at the way he stood there without pulling away, without looking anywhere else, and the thought settled in with a clarity that made it impossible to avoid. He had not just found me, he had been brought here. Maybe by chance, maybe by someone who had no idea what they were setting in motion, and that meant there was more to this story than I had seen so far, more than just the past catching up to me in a quiet park, and I felt something shift again, not uncertainty this time, but direction, because if he had come from there, if that was where his last 5 years had led him, then I needed to know, needed to understand what those years looked like, who had been part of them, and whether I was stepping into something that was already meant to end or something that was just beginning again. And as I stood there, looking between him and that distant sign, I realized this moment was not complete yet. It was only the beginning of something I had not expected to face, and whatever answers were waiting, they were not behind me, they were ahead, just beyond where I had stopped walking.